What happens when a disabled man in a small-town parking lot becomes the target of ruthless bikers? You won't believe how his quiet phone call turns the tables, and the late afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the cracked pavement of Jack's diner. The parking lot was quiet. Save for the occasional hum of an engine passing on the highway, a few trucks were parked near the far end, their drivers inside sipping coffee, lost in their own conversations. Nolan rolled into the lot, his wheelchair gliding smoothly over the pavement. He moved without hesitation, without urgency. He had been here before. The diner was a familiar place, one where people came and went, where no one paid much attention to anyone else. Or at least that was usually the case. Near the entrance, a group of 4 bikers stood beside their motorcycles, their voices carrying over the stillness of the evening. Loud, carefree, a little too confident. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, noticed Nolan first. He nudged his companion, muttered something under his breath. The others turned to look. A pause. Then the bearded man smirked. Nolan felt the shift in the air before anything was said. He didn't react, didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge them at all. But trouble had a way of finding people who weren't looking for it. One of the bikers adjusted his stance, boots scraping against the pavement. Another folded his arms, watching. And then a single step forward. Not rushed, not aggressive, just enough to block the path to the diner's entrance. For a moment, the only sound was the rustling of wind through the trees. Nolan stopped. His fingers rested lightly on the wheels. And in that moment, everything changed. Nolan sat still in his wheelchair, his hands resting lightly on the wheels. He didn't move. He didn't react. The bearded biker in front of him smirked, but there was something calculated behind it. He wasn't just standing there, he was waiting for a response. Behind him, the other 3 bikers watched, arms crossed, amusement flickering in their eyes. One of them, a wiry man with tattoos, tilted his head slightly, studying Nolan as if trying to figure out what kind of reaction they were about to get. Nolan remained silent. The bearded biker shifted, taking another slow step forward. Just enough to make it clear he wasn't planning to move aside. "Where are you headed, pal?" His voice was casual, almost friendly, but the weight behind it wasn't. One of the others chuckled, shaking his head. "The guy's got places to be, huh?" Nolan didn't answer, didn't blink. One of the bikers, the wiry one with tattoos, stepped closer and tapped the armrest of Nolan's wheelchair. "This thing got turbo or what?" Another round of laughter, low, mean. Inside the diner, a waitress glanced toward the window, hesitated, then turned away. No one inside wanted to get involved. That was how it usually went. A little taunting, a little intimidation. Then, when they got bored, they'd move on, laughing at the man who didn't fight back. Only this time, they had picked the wrong person. Nolan blinked once. Slow, deliberate. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket. The laughter faded. Just slightly, the bearded biker's smirk tightened. "What's that for?" Nolan didn't answer. Didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone. Diallo. Lifted it to his ear. "I'm at Jack's diner. Might need a little company." He ended the call. Slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he simply waited. The call that changed everything. For a moment, nothing happened. The bikers exchanged glances. Their smirks wavered, but none of them moved. Nolan remained still, his expression unreadable. He wasn't tense, he wasn't nervous. He was just waiting. The bearded biker scoffed, shaking his head. "Who'd you just call?" No response. Nolan's silence was steady, unshaken. The wiry biker with tattoos chuckled, nudging his friend. "Calm, man, what's he gonna do, call the cops?" That got a few snickers from the group, but not as confident as before. Then the sound came. Low at first. A deep, distant rumble rolling through the air. Faint, almost indistinguishable from the usual background noise of the highway. Then it grew. Louder, stronger, steady. One of the bikers frowned, glancing toward the road. "The hell is that?" No one answered. The rumble deepened, turning into a low, rolling growl. Then the headlights appeared. What? 2. 10. A convoy of motorcycles, chrome glinting under the dimming sunlight, moving in perfect formation. They weren't speeding, they weren't reckless. They didn't need to be. The bikers near Nolan stiffened, their confidence cracked. The first of the new arrivals pulled into the lot, followed by another, then another. They kept coming, each engine shut off in sequence, filling the lot with a wall of presence. And then, finally, silence. But it wasn't the kind of silence that came with peace. It was the kind that made men nervous. The bearded biker swallowed. No one was laughing now. The parking lot of Jack's Diner was no longer the same. Just moments ago, the 4 bikers had stood there, loud, confident, untouchable. Now they weren't so sure. The convoy of motorcycles had arrived, moving with precision and purpose, filling the lot like a tide rolling in. No chaos, no shouting, just Nolan remained in his wheelchair, unmoved, unbothered. He had never needed to say much. The call had spoken for him. One by one, the riders shut off their engines. The silence left behind was heavier than the noise had been. Then, a single man stepped forward. Tall, broad, a silver beard catching the last of the evening light. His movements were slow, deliberate, controlled. He didn't look at the bikers first. He looked at Nolan. "You good, brother?" Nolan met his gaze, his expression as steady as ever. "I am now." The silver-bearded man gave a single nod. Then he turned toward the 4 bikers. No words were spoken at first. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to make threats, because some things didn't need to be said out loud. The bearded biker shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how small their group had become. One of the others cleared his throat. "We didn't mean nothing by it," he muttered, voice quieter than before. Another biker, the wiry one with tattoos, took a slow step back, like he was ready to disappear. The silver-bearded man let the silence stretch. Let them feel it. Then, finally, he spoke. "Then say it properly." A pause. The bearded biker's jaw tightened. But he knew what had to be done. The parking lot of Jack's Diner had transformed. Moments ago, the 4 bikers had been loud, smug, untouchable. Now they stood stiffly, their confidence draining away, their presence overshadowed by the quiet authority of the convoy that had arrived. The silver-bearded man didn't move. Didn't need to. He simply stood there, watching them. "Then say it properly." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The bearded biker's mouth tightened. His jaw clenched. But he knew. This wasn't a fight he could win. There was no bravado left. No snide comments. He turned toward Nolan, his voice flat, reluctant. "We're sorry." A pause. The silver-bearded man watched him for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Then he turned away, dismissing them without another glance. It was over. The 4 bikers didn't wait for another word. They moved quickly, climbing onto their motorcycles. Their engines fired up, not with power, but with urgency. One by one, they pulled out of the lot, disappearing down the highway. No one chased them. No one needed to. The message had already been received. The tension in the air began to fade. Nolan remained still, his hands resting lightly on his wheels. He had never needed to move. Never needed to raise his voice. One of the riders from the convoy stepped forward, nodding toward him. "They won't be back." Nolan's expression didn't change. "I know." The silver-bearded man clapped a hand on Nolan's shoulder. "You know where to find us." Then, one by one, the riders mounted their bikes. A final rumble of engines rolled through the lot as the convoy pulled away. Controlled, deliberate, powerful. Nolan exhaled, his gaze following them for a moment. Then, with the same steady pace he had held all evening, he turned toward the diner. It was time for his meal. The parking lot of Jack's Diner was quiet once more. The 4 bikers were gone. Their engines had faded down the highway, swallowed by the night. The convoy had left, too. No rush, no chaos. Just a steady departure. Like they had only ever come to restore balance. Nolan sat for a moment, his fingers resting lightly on his wheels. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and rolled toward the diner. The door creaked as he entered. Inside, a few customers stole quick glances, but said nothing. The tension from earlier still lingered, but it had lost its edge. A waitress stood behind the counter, wiping a glass, watching him with a knowing smile. "Everything all right?" Nolan picked up the menu, scanning it briefly. He already knew what he was going to order. "Now it is." Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves. The parking lot was empty, save for a few trucks idling in the distance. The world had returned to normal, but some lessons didn't fade with the night. And those bikers would remember this one for a long, long time. "Hey, I just wanted to take a moment to remind you, you are stronger than you think. Life throws unexpected challenges our way, but how you respond defines you. Stay calm, stay steady. Some battles aren't won with force, but with patience, presence, and knowing when to stand your ground. Whatever you're facing, trust yourself. You don't have to be the loudest in the room to be heard. Sometimes silence carries more power than words ever could. Keep moving forward. You've got this. Let me know if you ever need anything. I'm here.